Good afternoon, people. I don't normally make videos on Shabbat, but due to a conversation I had earlier today, which all this started on Thursday or Friday. I think it was actually very, very early Friday morning where I hadn't gone to sleep yet Thursday night. But it continued on into today. There are a number of people going around preaching that the word God is actually the Babylonian, the Babylonian name of the deity of fortune. Okay, well, for starters, that's ludicrous, because just because a word in one language sounds similar to a word in another language does not mean that there is a correlation of any kind between those two words. All right. Now, as I understand it, the name of this Babylonian fortune deity, or deity of fortune, the name was Gad, spelled G-A-D in English, which, if that be the case, then that would mean that the tribe of Gad, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, was named after a Babylonian deity, a pagan god or goddess, whatever it is, which again is insane. But that's actually not the larger issue here. What the larger issue here is multifold, actually. And we'll start here with something that Paul said. And it's in Acts chapter 17, verse 23 specifically. But I think it starts around verse 21 or 22. Yeah, 21, I think, and I don't remember how long it runs. But I'm going to read verse 23 here. It says, "For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship him, declaring I unto you." Okay, well, that last part, him declare, him I declare unto you. All right, so Paul was in Athens, and he came past this altar of an unknown God that the Athenians worshipped. All right. And he told them, he said, y'all are ignorant about this God. Well, let me tell you about him. And Paul proceeded to teach and preach Yahweh. So what Paul did is he started where the people were to teach them, which is actually what another scripture tells us, that we start with milk. As babes, we're fed with milk, but we are to grow into meat. You start without knowledge, but you grow into knowledge. Do you understand what that means? I'm sure you do. So, all that being said, I'm not very good with foreign languages, especially when I don't like to use this word feel, but especially when I feel like I'm being coerced into it, or kind of coerced, forced, or being backed into a corner with it. For starters, I just have a hard time remembering the association between English spelled Hebrew word and what it actually means, like Yom Kippur, which I think is the Day of Atonement. And the only reason I remember that one specifically is because of the word Yom. And for some reason or another, the word Yom, which is day, like a 24-hour day or 12 daylight hours day, sticks with me. I don't know why, it just kind of organically does. So that's how I remember Yom Kippur. But then there's Yom Teruah. See, I can't even pronounce them right. Shavuot and stuff like that. And just for whatever reason, I, as born and raised American English speaker, notice I said American English speaker, not English speaker, because it's actually the people from England that speak English. As Americans, we speak Americanized English. But anyway, as one who was born and raised in speaking Americanized English, and then to consider the way that it has been bastardized through my lifetime, you know, with modern slang words such as, if you'll listen carefully to people talk, they don't ask questions anymore, they ask questions. So, you know, there's two mispronunciations, and I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just referencing the way that language has evolved in America, you know, within my lifetime alone. Not to mention how it has evolved since the 15, 16, 1700s, you know, when English-speaking people first began coming to this continent and colonizing. But if your audience is English speaking or American English speaking, then speak in English to them, because you're not being any more spiritual by trying to speak in Hebrew any more than I'm being proven how much I like Hispanic food by speaking Mexican, which I know a little bit of Mexican or Spanish, you know, whatever you want to call it, because it's actually people that speak Spanish are the people that come from Spain. You know, people that come from Mexico speak Mexican. You know, just like people from Mars would speak Martian, if there were any people from Mars, you know. So, you know, this false concept of needing to speak in Hebrew, and, you know, I was even told that, well, we're speaking in Hebrew because it's a restoration of the language according to Scripture. Well, that's not what Scripture says. What Scripture says is there will come a time of restoration of all things. And guess when that time is? That time will be when Yeshua takes over and rules for 1,000 years. Or it will be after Satan is loosed for a time to go out and deceive the nations. It doesn't mean now. So, another aspect of that is, which I mentioned earlier, when you're writing these things and it confuses people and it frustrates people because they may actually be interested in what you're writing or what you're trying to explain to them, and then you get to spitting out all these Heblish words, you know, Hebrew English, and they get frustrated because they don't know what it means, and then they have to stop reading and copy it and paste it or go type it in or something another like that to figure out what it is that you're talking about, by which time they've lost the momentum of reading or listening to what you were talking about, and, you know, whatever they may have been learning or receiving in that message that you were giving them is lost. In other words, you're turning people off to receiving. And I'm not saying you're turning everyone off to receiving, but when I used to work with Hispanic fellows, I had to speak in Spanglish. They understood a little bit of English and mostly Spanish. And they had to speak in Spanglish because I understand mostly English and a little bit of Spanish. Now, if I spoke Spanish or Mexican fluently, why would I want them to talk to me in Spanglish? And why would I talk to them in Spanglish? Why not just speak to them in the language that they understand? You know, just as the majority of the people who are probably going to be watching this video, their native language is English of some sort. Americanized English, you know, from being born and raised here, or Canadian English, which, you know, a lot of people in Canada actually speak French. But even still, I'd say the majority of Canadians probably know English of some variety. And so there's already a cultural barrier between the people in Canada and the people of the United States. You know, there's political barriers, there are other cultural barriers and whatnot. So why are you just going to add another barrier to communication by trying to talk in Hebrew English? Quite frankly, it's ridiculous. You know, and I'm not picking on you, and I apologize if you feel like I'm fussing at you or anything like that. I'm not. By no means am I trying to belittle you or quench or quash your desire to learn Hebrew. Absolutely not. If you want to learn it, learn it. By all means, learn it. You know, you have my prayers that you know, Yahweh will make it easier for you to learn it and understand it and whatnot. But know your audience. You know, I'm not standing here trying to speak to y'all in Spanglish, am I? No. I'm talking in Americanized English, and I'm sticking to one language. You know, this person also tried to convince me of how all these other pagan deity names have been crammed into, we'll say, the King James Version, for instance, because that's typically what I read more than anything else. I find it easier to understand, believe it or not. It's the other way with most people. But if that be the case, then how is it that Yahweh brought me to truth if I had my nose buried in a pagan book, according to what I'm being told by this other person or these groups of other people? I mean, it's insanity to think such a thing. And beyond that, the whole context of the conversation was about calling the feast by an English name. So, you know, I asked the question, and what's wrong with calling it Passover or the Feast of Trumpets or unleavened bread or anything like that? To which I got a whole nother earful. Well, it's not really the Feast of Trumpets, it's the Feast of Breath, and it's not even a feast. It's, I mean, you know, and I'm sitting here thinking as I'm reading this, really? You know, I mean, how far removed how far removed from the average person does someone's thinking have to be in order for them to, I mean, I don't even know how to express what I'm saying here. You know, they're literally They are doing what the Pharisees did, and the Pharisees tried to portray themselves as being so extremely spiritual that they were so high above everyone else that there's just, you know, oh, y'all can't even get to how spiritual I am unless you do this and you do this and you do this and you do this. You know, that was kind of the Pharisees' point when they came up to Yeshua, Jesus in English, and got on him for his disciples eating without washing their hands according to the traditions of the elders. You know, they came up and said, you know, Rabbi, rebuke your disciples. And he asked them why. They told him, well, because they're eating with unwashed hands. They haven't washed their hands according to the traditions of the elders. Well, tell me, where in Torah are we instructed anywhere to wash our hands before we eat, except for the priest? And they weren't washing before they ate. They were washing everything before they went in and performed their priestly duties of the sacrifices and offerings, you know, the wave offerings and the burnt offerings and, you know, all of that stuff. As a matter of fact, there's one instruction, and I don't remember if it's in Leviticus or Deuteronomy or where it is, where when they were taking the ashes away from the altar, they were supposed to wash before they took the ashes away from the altar. I mean, come on, we're just cleaning up ashes here. And they're supposed to wash before they take the ashes away from the altar. And then after they did that, they were unclean for a certain period of time. But nowhere is there an instruction for the common person to wash anything before they eat. Just a regular sit down, okay, it's, you know, the middle of the week and I'm sitting down for my evening meal. You know, where is there an instruction to wash before that? And if there is, I missed it, I apologize, point it out to me so that I can continue to learn. But do it in English, otherwise I can't read it. You know, post it in the comments below. Certainly by all means, but please know your audience. Now, if you're in a private chat with somebody and both of you are on the same level and speaking Heblish, then knock yourselves out. But when you're speaking to the general public, or, you know, I wouldn't walk into a church and trying to open these people's eyes up to Torah. I wouldn't walk into a church and start talking about, you know, Yahweh, Yeshua, and Yom Kippur, and all these other words that I don't know. I mean, if I did know them, because they're not there. You know, typically when I'm talking to new people, depending on the situation, of course, but like if I was to walk into a church gathering, say if I was to go to a church building, you know, part of the pagan system, tomorrow morning, and start preaching to these people, I wouldn't even broach the subject of eating clean and unclean. In fact, I would stay almost entirely in the New Testament, because that's where they are. But I would go and show them all through the New Testament, in the book of Acts and the book of John and all those. No, sir. Go lay down. Okay, that's good enough. Sorry about that. I'm wearing shorts. I ain't wanting to touch my leg with his muddy feet. But, so, you know, I would take them through the New Testament and show them stuff like 1 John chapter 3 verse 4. You know, sin is transgression of the law. And take them through the book of Acts, where Paul, you know, they tried to restrain him, and Paul says, you know, I got to go to Jerusalem for this feast. And all the other places where Paul had to go and do these feasts, because it's usually Paul that they cite when they're trying to make the proclamation that Torah obedience has been annulled, abolished, done away with, or whatever. So you got to talk to people where they are. All this talking in Hebrew and whatnot, it's silly. Anyway, if I've stepped on anybody's toes, I apologize. Remember Acts chapter 17 verses 10 and 11, 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15, Proverbs chapter 18 verses 13 and 21. I hope to see you all in the kingdom of heaven. Like, subscribe. Don't forget to click the bell. I don't make any money on this, but the more people subscribe, the further these videos go. And, I'm not looking for anything for myself. Other than to continue learning and serving Yahweh, but I'm not a teacher. I just kind of talk about the way I understand things. So all that being said, Yahweh bless.